Hi and welcome to RCKicks. On today's show, well, we restore a Lancia Rally from Tamiya. Now, if you haven't seen any previous videos on this one, I'll put a link up here, go check it out. But over the last 5 days, I've restored it back to beautiful condition. I am super chuffed how it turned out. It wasn't easy. The old body had all the old decals on it, so getting them off was a pain. Then the residue, and then reacting with other paints as there's so much oil and just general mank in the body. It's taken hours, but it was well worth it. It's absolutely stunning and it screams vintage Tamiya. Anyway, do you want to see it? Okay, hit it, Charlie. I'm absolutely blown away, super chuffed. It was so much work. You're not going to believe how much effort went into it. But in the end, I managed to pull it all together and it's turned out. So we'll go through each stage of it and all the pain in the backside I had with it. So kicking off with the body. Now the body itself was a total gem. There was no damage to this body whatsoever. There's no cracks, nothing. But because it had kind of not really been painted. Well, I didn't think it had been painted at all, but actually it turns out the back section was painted, which also added to the frustration when I was painting it. But I don't know if it was touched in or what, but there's no damage. Just a bit weird. So taking the original decals off was a bit of a faff because they'd just been on there for like 25 years. Now, there's a few tips for getting that sort of sticky residue off. You can use furniture polish, WD-40, but you've got to be a bit careful because if you're going to paint it up afterwards, when you're using things like WD-40, you've really got to get it off the body, otherwise it reacts with the paint. So after faffing around, I originally got all the decals off, then I soaked it in washing up liquid for about 5 hours because I was trying to pull out as much of the grease and the oil as I could. Then I blew it over in just normal primer, and then I had some reaction in a few different spots, so I sanded them down. Then I blew it in again and I was getting other reactions in different places, so I decided what I would do is then blow it over in filler primer, which is a bit thicker. Also there's a few little scratches and stuff due to its age, so I blew it over with that. That seemed to be a bit happier. It didn't react with the body as much, so then I sanded that down a little bit. Then after that I went over and I painted it in the white. I think I did 4 coats maybe of the white, and then I left it overnight, and then we cleared it with 3 layers of clear, and that got me a nice finished paint job, and I'm really happy with it. It came out fine, and I was pushing. The problem I've got is obviously trying to release videos is I have to get the painting finished the night before to give it time to dry enough to put the decals on the next day, so I have to be a bit careful with my timing, so end up painting into the darkness, which is not that great, which causes me some problems with a few little extra bits and pieces, lacquering them too heavily in the dark and then having to rub them down and do them again, so you can see where it's going. But it was totally worth it, and the paint came out beautifully. There's no runs, no issues at all. So after that we had to put the decals on. Now I did have a set of new decals from the Riri, and I was also gifted a set of vintage ones. So I've put the vintage ones on. Apart from the ones that were better, or they just didn't exist. So for example, the rear that you've got here, this is, you don't get this decal on the original one. It's just you paint it black. The number plate again is completely different. It's not the number plate that you see here. It's just a clear number. So I think the original decals back in the day, they really struggled with high contrast. So if you've got white lettering on black background or vice versa, they had issues with that. So it was surprising how different the decals were. The one challenge is obviously the original decals that I've used are old, and getting them to go on around the body is a real challenge. And I actually didn't struggle with it, but you have to adjust them. They're not perfect. You actually have to mess around and change a few, especially around the back here. So getting the decals down. Now I used the hairdryer technique. I didn't use the water because sometimes when you use the water on old decals, the stickiness is not really there in the first place and it can make things worse. So I used the hairdryer. Put down the top one. Now a big tip for you on that one is when you're going to line up these decals, just line it up with the front. The front of the decal is actually cut in the same line as the light. So if you line it up at the front, which is what you're going to see the most anyway, then when you flip it down, it goes up and you just get it to this corner here. Now that works brilliantly. Then on the second one is you just line it up again and then you just go right to the edge. Now the only problem with that is that really you want the overlap this way. You want the top to go over. So when you look down on it, you get a better overlap. But doing this one along here, before the top one, forget it, you're never going to do it. But if you butt them up really nicely, it actually works really well. And my seams across here are pretty decent. So for me, the most challenging decal of this set is the one at the end here. This one is split into two parts, but this is really difficult. And I had real issues here. And I had to adjust it. You can see it's not perfect along here, unfortunately. All the rest came out really nice. I'm being picky. I mean, you can't really see, like, it wants to bubble here, but I've managed to get it, most of it out. It's just really, really difficult. Obviously, having the petrol cap there as well, I've got to go back and do that in silver. Same with the door handle. This one is actually pretty easy. I'm a little bit low here. You need to get this to go up a little bit higher, which then squished these a little bit. I think it looks okay. I mean, it is very tight here anyway, but that should be a fraction of a mil higher. What I found is it's better to actually paint this in first before putting the decals over. That way you'll get a better overall look. I did the other one afterwards and it's a lot harder. I still got to go in and do the petrol cap in silver, but you're better off doing it first. This is the tricky one. Also, you're probably better off putting this decal on before attaching this because it's inside. So there's another tip for you. Now, it's not just the decals you've got to do. You actually have to do some painting. Now, I use the Tamiya X1. This works perfectly fine. You've got to do the front rubbers around the windscreen and the rear screen. Luckily, they're pretty straight, so you can mask them off and then just touch them in. Take your time. Also, you've got to do the bottom of the body here, the scuttle shape, whatever you want to call it, the seal. You've got to do that. That's pretty easy, but don't leave them out. It's definitely worth doing. Obviously, don't fit the Perspex glass before you paint it. Otherwise, you're just going to make your life much harder. Another little tip for you, when you put this sticker here, the best thing that I found is don't just put the Perspex in and then try and stick it on. It actually wants to go underneath the body a little bit. Otherwise, you will have a line gap, which you don't want. So what I did is I got a black pen, put the Perspex windows in, draw a line around just the top section, then take it out, fit the sticker to that line and then put it back in because you want it to be slightly under, and there's no way you can put the sticker on the outside. You've got to do it with the glass out of the car. So apart from that, the body comes together really nicely. It just takes way longer than you think. Now, there was one challenge that I had, which I'm pretty sure if you're trying to restore one of these, you're going to have exactly the same thing, and that's yellowing of the plastic, especially around the rims and the front bumper. So the way you can sort that out is you can get some peroxide. Now, this is 12% peroxide that I bought. You can, at a push, go to your local pharmacist and you'll be able to get some hair dye that has a little bit of this in it. But they vary. They're about 9% normally, and you want stuff that's a little bit stronger. And you take some of this, put it in a bag, and then you put it out in the sunlight, and it will actually remove that kind of yellowing. It does take quite a while. I left this front bumper and these rims for probably 24 hours. You might think that it's not working, but it just takes plenty of time. But I picked this stuff up off of eBay, super dirt cheap, and it's brilliant for that kind of thing. So that then gives you the nice fresh wheels. Luckily, my tires were actually in brilliant condition and they weren't glued to the rims. If your tires are glued to your rims and you need to get them off, you need to get some acetone, but don't put the wheels and tires in the acetone. What you want to do is suspend them above some acetone, because it's the vapors that eat the super glue. So if you just drop them in, you'll just melt whatever it is you put into it, and then put a sealed top on it and then leave it for about 24 hours, and that will break down the gases, will break down the super glue, so you can get the tires off. So luckily mine weren't glued, so I didn't have to go through that, but I've done that many times before and it works brilliantly. But remember, suspend it above the liquid. You don't want it in the liquid, otherwise whatever you put in is gone. It will be in 24 hours. So I managed to put them back in and they all came out really nice, and that helps to make it. I was very lucky. Trying to replace these tyres is super difficult. So the only thing left to do is the driver. Now I had to peel it off because it's glued to the actual body. And yes, it's old and brittle. I did snap off a little bit of the tab, but I got most of it off. Now, when I fitted it back in the car, I actually drilled a hole and used a vintage nut and bolt and clamped it in instead of like gluing it like it was before. Now, I tightened the driver up a little bit. It was kind of painted in the most basic way, so I've added a little bit more detail to the best of my skill level, and it's pretty much done. So it took so long, but it was worth every bit of it. I am super chuffed with it. It came out lovely. So I hope you enjoyed that restoration as much as I did. It was brilliant, even though it took hours. But it wasn't just that. I have been busy doing other things. So the next installment in this series is this. So if you would like to see the building of this, then at the end of this video, there should be a link. See you over there soon. Bye-bye.